Hello, my friends. Today we're going to talk about an absolutely extraordinary flight, Air Canada 624. And we're going to see how sometimes a misunderstanding of a concept of a word can end up poisoning the pilot's knowledge, the documentation they receive, the training they get, and one day cause a disaster. So it's March 25, 2015, and we have this flight on an Airbus A320, which is going from Toronto to Halifax. There are 138 people on board, and our aircraft is going to have a completely normal flight until the approach. So the approach to Halifax will happen around 12:30 a.m., so it's nighttime. There are quite a few factors that day. There's a snowstorm. Not the worst storm, not the storm of the century, but still there's a snowstorm. There are clouds, precipitation, so that's going to significantly reduce visibility. And on top of that, it's nighttime. So our crew is cleared to approach runway 05, and this one didn't have an ILS, didn't have a full instrument guidance system, but what it did have, it had a localizer. So we're here on runway 05, and we have a LOC type approach. DME. So the LOC is the part, if you will, of the ILS that handles lateral navigation. If you will, sorry for using Boeing terminology in a video about Airbus, but lateral navigation is what allows you to find the runway centerline, so the LOC helps you find it. The DME is what allows you to know the distance from the runway, so that's great. However, we don't have any vertical guidance here, on the vertical plane. You see, on the vertical plane, we don't have any guidance. Whereas with a full ILS, we have what's called the glide slope, which also allows, it's another radio beam that allows you to know or to visualize the descent slope, which lets the aircraft always stay on the correct slope. So what our pilots are going to do by following what we call the SOPs, the company's standard operating procedures, is this. They're going to use an FPA mode. That means I drop my pen, it's no big deal. So look, we have our runway here, okay? This is runway 05 and they're here. He calculates that they need roughly, taking into account all the parameters of the day, he calculates that they need a descent path from here of 3.5, 3.5. So what they're going to do, so this plan, he says it's 3.5%. Donc, so what they're going to do is set the autopilot to a mode that will display a little bird. That's the FPA mode. And actually, with this mode, you set it to 3 or 3.5 degrees. You set it to -3 or 3.5 degrees because it's descending here, okay? And then what it will do is make sure that the aircraft's flight path vector, the aircraft's velocity vector, well, it will have an angle of 3 or 3.5 degrees below the horizon. That means if I take my horizon, the horizon is here, the horizon is here. Well, the 3 or 3.5 degrees are here, okay? This view, this quick, simplistic view has a major flaw, That's how it was described in the company's standard procedures. That's how it was explained to the pilots, but that's not how Airbus designed it, nor how it was in the aircraft's manuals. So there was, if you will, as we sometimes say, lost in translation, meaning it was lost during translation, but here rather during transcription. When we wanted to start from the Airbus documentation and create company documentation, we messed up, that's it, we messed up somewhere. Because that's wrong, that view is wrong, I'm telling you. What we understood, what we had understood when we developed, so these procedures, it's that if I take this point and set -3 or 3.5, it's as if the plane will define a descent path of 3 or 3.5 degrees and follow it. That's how it was understood. But in reality, that's not it. In reality, this is what it's going to do. In reality, the Airbus will follow. A 3-degree path, it will always try to keep -3 or 3.5 degrees at every moment, but without memory. No memory exists of what happened before. There's nothing like that. It won't mark anything out in space. It will simply try to maintain a 3 to 3.5 degree descent at every given moment without considering the previous or following moments. Here's the difference. So the pilots imagined it as a kind of poor man's ILS. Of course, they never thought it was as precise as an ILS and all that, but at the same time, they thought that's what it would do in reality. I'll give you a simple example. Let's put this just temporarily. Let's temporarily imagine that this is an ILS, it's an ILS descent path, and that the autopilot is set to it. So the autopilot is set to it. This is my plane. Let's say, for example, there's a gust of wind or turbulence that brings the plane below the descent path. What will the plane do? What is it going to do? It's going to get back on the descent path. Let's imagine that after that, the wind changes direction, or there's another gust that lifts it above the descent path. What will it do? It's going to come back to the descent path. You see, so it's always, when we're, for example, on an ILS, on ILS guidance, it's always going to want to keep that path that's marked out in space. The ILS descent path is fixed. It's there, you can draw it, it's there. And the plane will stay on it. That's not true. So here, this is what's going to happen. I'll show you in red what the plane did. So it starts here. Let's say there's a little gust that pushes it lower than the intended descent path. Well, what is it going to do? It's immediately going to go back to 3 to 3.5 degrees. It's immediately going to say, oops, I'm descending too low here. Speed up and return me to 3.5, so it'll decrease with 3 or 3.5. Great, it'll stabilize for a while. Then, let's say 20 or 30 seconds later, there's more turbulence or the wind changes direction or something else, and bam, it's going to descend. There's going to be a bump a bit lower. So what is it going to do? Let's say it loses 10 meters. Oh, we'll say, oh, it's going down too much. Okay, I'll catch up. I'll set it to 3 or 3.5. And so what it's going to do is it's always going to follow a path that's parallel to that descent path, but it will always be, which will vary depending on the elements, which will vary depending on the wind, turbulence, and all that. So you see that we're not at all following that descent path. We're each time following little segments of 3.5 minus 3.5 degrees, but they can end up pretty much anywhere. There's only one case. There's a unique case where this and that are the same thing. What's in red and what's in black. Imagine we have zero wind. One day we arrive, there's no wind at all, no turbulence, nothing at all. So yeah, in that case, we set -3 to -3.5, and it will follow that path as long as nothing comes to disturb it. If there's any disturbance up or down, it won't try to catch up to the path, just correct itself, okay? That was a huge mistake that was in Air Canada's SOPs. So a mistake, it happens, okay? Now, in aviation, we always try to have a system that is tolerant of errors. Error tolerant, what does that mean? Error tolerant means that my system doesn't have just a single step between a mistake and a catastrophe. It means that if ever there's a problem, any kind of mistake, we have elements further along that allow us to catch it, that allow us to recover from it. So there you go. If you take the published approach for the 05 in lock DMI by GPZ, well, there's a small table. There's a small table like this. And this table, it says it's going to give you distance, altitude. So you're going to have the distance, let's say 853, then the altitude that will give you some altitudes. What does that allow? It allows pilots to have this in front of them and regularly check at regular intervals that they're exactly where they should be, that they're neither too high nor too low, right? That means there you go, they're descending and checking. Careful, look, 10 DME, 5.0 perfect. I look at the altimeter and I see, am I too high, too low, or am I exactly on point? If they had done this check, they would have actually noticed that their aircraft systematically at every checkpoint was drifting lower, lower, and lower than the descent path. Here's what Air Canada's SOP said, and this is where it gets crazy. They said that when using this type of approach, when using the Airbus FPA mode, okay, when using this mode, you don't have to check that. I don't know why anyone would think, right, to say there's no need to check. We're on an approach in zero visibility, okay? We're in what's called a non-precision approach. We don't have guidance because we don't have vertical guidance. And what do? We say, you know what, guys? Don't do any checks, please. Why would anyone even think of that? In any case, the pilots followed the company's instructions and didn't do the check. What's going to happen is that they keep on descending. At some point, there will be city lights that they'll probably confuse with the approach lights because they're expecting the aircraft to appear well aligned with the runway, both vertically and horizontally. So they're sure that everything is set, you know, that on the VNAV, NAV, everything is set. So what are they going to do? They're suddenly going to see some lights. And those weren't the runway lights, those were ground lights, or what they call cultural lighting in Canada. They see the city lights and say, okay, keep going, it's fine. He keeps going. He goes below the MDA, which means he goes below the minimum descent altitude. By that altitude, they have to have the runway in sight. And actually, the runway wasn't there. It was farther away. And what happens is that at some point, they realize they're too low. They realize they've gone below the descent path and they've been fooled. They grab the throttles, push them all the way forward for a go around, pitch the plane up, and at that moment, they hit violently. So the aircraft is going to hit. So what it's going to do is hit here, you see? So here it's going to hit here. We're roughly 250 meters before the runway. They're also going to hit the power lines, all that, but they were lucky because there could have been a hangar or there could have been rocks or anything, you see. So they were really very lucky. It hits here. Then it bounces several times, bang, bang, bang. And then it ends. It ends up on the runway, you see. It ends up here on the runway, completely wrecked. One of the engines was torn off. It was found a little further away. So the engine was torn off. The plane is completely wrecked. But you realize planes are still pretty solid, you know, airplanes, because some people, they're scared during turbulence and all that. But honestly, and on top of the turbulence, honestly, when you're flying at altitude, it's turbulence that happens in thin air, you know. There's not much air, you know. So it's true that it shakes, it bumps. But in reality, there's not a lot of energy behind it, you know, because the air is already thin. But here we're hitting the ground. So what happens is that the aircraft gets shaken up and it stops abruptly. At that point, there's an evacuation that takes place. People start to get out. There are quite a few injuries, including the co-pilot in particular, because the captain, well, he was shaken up and all that, but the worst off was the co-pilot, because what happened to the co-pilot was this. Normally, he has a seatbelt around his waist, and there are two belts that go over his shoulders, which attach to a kind of disc he has at his waist, right at his stomach, at his waist. So what happened is that the right strap didn't have a locking system. That means normally it works like a seatbelt, like in a car or something. If you pull on it sharply, it should stop. Well, the locking system is an inertial locking system, a mechanical system. So if you pull slowly, it moves, which allows freedom of movement. But if you pull it suddenly, it should lock. Well, what happened is that it didn't lock at all. The system had been damaged for a long time and it had never been noticed. By the way, if you look, there's a video on this channel and a friend of mine died under those circumstances. He takes off, loses both engines, tries to turn back to the runway and has bad fuel. So both engines stopped in quick succession, one after the other. Then a sharp turn to get back to the runway, loss of control, and the plane crashes. And to really add the final element that sealed his fate, both seatbelts, well, the harness system was damaged, which caused his body to be thrown forward. He hit the dashboard, the control stick and everything, and that's it. It severed an artery near the heart. So here what's going to happen is that our co-pilot, his body will move forward, but it will rotate. Rotate, why? Simply because the left shoulder is stuck and the right shoulder is free. So he will rotate, his head will move forward, and he will hit. It will injure him very, very badly in the eye. I think he lost an eye from what I heard. But I can't find exactly the details of all these injuries. But in any case, it's an extremely serious injury to the right eye. So the emergency services arrived. There was quite a delay in evacuating the passengers because there were also rules at the airport, which said that first we send the firefighters. Okay, we send the firefighters first. Okay, we send the firefighters. And only after that, we send the transport vehicles. Okay. And we have to wait for the firefighters to say it's okay before sending the transport vehicles. The scene is secured means we have checked everything related to fire, equipment, all that, so that the transport vehicles can come and pick up the passengers. So the problem is that this setup doesn't prevent us from getting the transport vehicles ready so that as soon as the firefighters say so, we can go. They were a bit behind on that. And so the passengers were out in the cold and everything. It was -5 degrees that night, plus the blizzard and all. They still stayed quite a while on the runway in that temperature, you know, especially when you're not dressed very warmly and all. Speaking of dressing warmly, there were people who also tried to leave with their suitcases. Okay, but that, I honestly think if you have a suitcase, I think the aviation authorities will have to change the aircraft certification rules. That means evacuation procedures will have to be determined. With suitcases and backpacks, we need to decide what to do rather than just telling people to leave your suitcases and all your belongings and get out. And then we say they got out in 90 seconds, so that's great, we approve it. No, we should tell them to take all their suitcases, their coats, their belongings and everything, evacuate, and we have to evacuate in 90 seconds. In that case, you'll see the requirement will be to have more emergency exits on planes and maybe even fewer seats in reality too, because honestly, that's what people do. The idea of leaving your belongings, I would leave my things, but the idea isn't realistic. And about belongings, on this channel, once I had someone who was on the Costa Concordia, that ship that capsized in Italy, that hit one of the rocks. And then the captain wanted to show off a little, and in the end, he broke the hull and everything. Well, the people who left without their suitcases, without money, without passports, it wasn't easy for them, right? It wasn't easy. Some people ended up homeless in Italy, you know what I mean? For example, the United States Embassy, there were people who had an American passport and they told them, listen, we're the embassy, we're not here for you, we're not here to help you, you have to manage on your own. Passport fees are listed here. An emergency passport costs this amount. Bring exact change as we don't provide any. Use the photo machine over there, which costs X dollars or X euros. You are responsible for payment. And for people who had a residence permit and all, those who are foreigners, it's even worse for them. For them to get a residence permit abroad at an embassy, good luck with that. People didn't have enough food or money for a taxi. Just because you survived a crash doesn't mean everything is free. You see what I mean? You survive a crash, you get to the airport, well, you go to McDonald's, so how much is it? You pay. If your card was left on the plane, what do you expect me to do for you, huh? You try to beg some passengers, maybe someone nice will buy you a drink or something else, but it's not easy, You shouldn't think otherwise. That's why people tend to do that, because we live in a pretty inhuman world, whether we realize it or not, right? So in the end, out of the 138 people, what's great is that we have 138 people who are okay, which is really great, huh? I mean, we don't ask anything more from a pilot. After that, there were still a few injuries. The plane was scrapped. It was completely destroyed, plus some minor damage to the runway and all that. But that wasn't the hardest thing to fix. So there you go. And the SOPs, the standard procedures, were, believe it or not, changed. But anyway, it was definitely an accident. It's not an incident. It's an accident. Even if the plane was wrecked and no one died, it's still an accident. According to the ACI, deaths aren't what define an accident. It's fine. They do it, If there are any, yes, it's an accident, but this level of damage, it's still something very, very serious. It's lucky the plane didn't catch fire. So all of that, everything is fine. All's well that ends well. There you go, my friends. Thank you for watching this video this far. Let me remind you about my book, Astrology. It's a book I think is important to read because it talks about how political ecology is used to attack our way of life, to attack the economy, to also attack aviation, add taxes, ban planes, block things, all of that. So I think it's a must read. You can find it on Amazon in Kindle or paperback format, and it's even available on Audible for those who prefer listening. I'm the one who reads it. I'm very proud of that. Thank you, my friends, and thank you to those who support this channel on Patreon and elsewhere, and I'll see you in the next one.